Hello, viewers. Welcome to Lawyer Salad's weekly series. I am Sunday Adaji. This week, I am presenting to you the topic titled The Nigerian Correctional Service Act and its Implication on Prison Reforms in Nigeria. The new Nigerian Correctional Service Act and its implication on prison reforms in Nigeria. Now, for a long time now, there has been agitation. There has been agitation for prison reforms. And when you get to Nigerian prisons, any of the branches of Nigerian prisons, you will understand that the prison conditions are deplorable. Talk of the social amenities, talk of the welfare of prisoners, talk of overcrowding. The prisons are entirely deplorable. And this agitation for prison reforms continues until 2008, when this bill, the Nigerian Correctional Service Bill, was first presented. That was 11 years ago, 2008, by Senator Victor Ndoma Egba. Since that time till 2018, nothing was done as far as the passing of this bill to act. Nothing was done on it. However, recently, President Muhammadu Buhari passed the bill into law. That was August 2019, and this bill is no doubt going to be it's going to bring about a great reforms going by the content of the bill. But how soon these reforms will become a reality depends on implementation. And that has been the major problem we have in the country. We have many laws, but these laws are not being implemented. But one thing is sure: if this act, the Nigerian Correctional Service Act, is implemented, there's going to be a massive impact on prison reforms in Nigeria. Now, before I proceed to discuss the impact, the implication of the impact of this act, we would like to discuss 10 things we need to know, or rather 9 things we need to know about this new act called the Nigerian Correctional Service Act. The first thing to note is that this legislation changes the name of the Nigerian prison to Correctional Service, Nigerian Correctional Service. So that instead of calling it Nigerian prison, what we now call it is the Nigerian Correctional Service. 2. The second thing to know about this new legislation is that it empowers state controller of prisons to reject additional prisoners where the prison is already filled to capacity. It is worthy of note that presently our prisons are overcrowded to the extent that it is filled to the capacity and there is nothing the Nigeria can do, the government can do about it. But with the implementation of this law, we believe that our prisons, there's going to be reform, and this overcrowding will be drastically reduced. So what this law empowers the state controller to do is to ensure that the prison is not filled, our prisons are not filled to capacity. Now, the third thing we need to know about this new legislation is that it divides correctional service into 2. The first one is the custodial service, and the second one is the non-custodial service. Now, number 4, the custodial service will, among other things, take control of prisoners in safe, secure, and human conditions. And the service and the act also makes provision for the support to facilitate the speedy disposal of cases of persons awaiting trial. Presently, one of the projects Lawyers Alert is carrying out is prisoners intervention. And this project, and in carrying out this project, Lawyers Alert staff paid regular visit to Nigerian prisons. And what we realize is that the number of persons awaiting trial in prisons far outweigh the number of persons who are sentenced to prison. As a result of this, there is a lot of work to be done, but with the implementation or with the coming into being of this new act, the act provides for support to facilitate speedy trial of prisoners awaiting trial who are remanded in prisons indefinitely. Now, the 5th thing we need to know about this new legislation called the Nigerian Correctional Service Act is that the act that the non-custodial service will be responsible for the measures to be to be given to those prisoners, for those persons whose offenses does not require imprisonment. And this has to do with custodial measures to be handed out to them, which has to do with community service, parole, and so on and so forth. Now, the 6th point we need to know about this new legislation is that the objective of the legislation is it focuses on correction. It focuses on correction, promoting reforms and rehabilitation, and reintegration of offenders. Unlike previously, when the issue of Nigerian prisons has to do with punishment of offenders, incarceration, but under this new act, the non-custodial service has to do with correction, promoting reforms and rehabilitation and reintegration. Then the 7th point we need to know about the legislation is that the correctional service, the law is meant to initiate behavioral change, behavioral modification among the inmates through the provision of medical, psychological, spiritual, and counseling services for all offenders, including even the violent extremists and hardened criminals. The 8th things we need to know about this legislation is that the legislation also states that where an inmate sentenced to death has exhausted all legal procedures for appeal, and a period of 10 years has elapsed without the execution of the sentence, his punishment by death will be converted to life imprisonment. Then the 9th thing we need to know about the legislation, the new legislation, is that it stipulates correctional service will be headed by the Controller General and a minimum of 8 Deputy Controller Generals. Now, the next topic we need to take a look at now is the implication of the Act on prison reforms. How does the new legislation How is it going to bring about reforms? And what are the reforms is it going to bring about? The first thing we need to talk about is that it provides for application of alternatives to imprisonment stroke non-custodial sanction. Prior to the enactment of this act, all offenders always end up in prison, whether their offenses require imprisonment or not. But with the passage of this act, the law provides for application of alternatives. The strength of this act and the major implication and the importance of this act anchors on alternative to incarceration. Alternative to incarceration, which has to do with non-custodial sanctions. And this non-custodial sanction has to do with community service. For example, where a person commits a petty offense or minor offense, the law provides that it can be sentenced, it can be handed out punishment by a sentence of a community service, which has to do with maybe cleaning the floor, washing the public toilets, and that is all. So the new act provides for alternative to incarceration. Then the second implication on prison reform is that it complies, the act, if implemented, it complies with international human rights standard. It complies with international human rights standard. Under international human rights law, the welfare of prisoners are catered for, their health, their condition, their rehabilitation, their reintegration, their counseling, everything is taken care of. And this is what this bill has also brought about. It complies with international human rights standard. The third implication of the Act on Prison Reforms in Nigeria is that it will bring about a reduction of overcrowding in prison. If this act is well implemented, we will no longer have overcrowding. Our prisons will no longer be congested, and only those that will be in prison are those whose offenses merit imprisonment. Unlike presently, where persons who are not supposed to be in prisons are remanded in prisons. With the implementation of this act, only those that will be in prison are those whose offenses require imprisonment. For this reason, it will bring about reduction of overcrowding in our prisons. The fourth reforms that the act will bring about is that it is going to bring about increased rehabilitation and reintegration, because the act makes provision for implementation of programs bordering on rehabilitation of inmates, their reintegration into the society, and equally their empowerment. So the fifth implication is that petty and minor offenders will no longer be jailed. Instead, they will be handed down custodial measures. They will be handed custodial measures. Presently, Lawyers Alert is carrying out projects bordering on decriminalization of petty offenses. The project is anchored on the fact that some petty offenses, that most of these offenses we refer to as petty offenses or minor offenses, are things that does not require sanctions in the first place. So this project we are carrying out has to do with decriminalization. That is to say that in the first place, petty offenses, all these offenses need not to be criminalized in the first place. So what we are talking about has to do with petty offenses. And as far as this act is concerned, if implemented, petty offenders, minor offenders will no longer be jailed. Instead, they will be handed out custodial measures, which has to do maybe with community service and parole. So the sixth implication is that if this act is implemented, others, like women or persons who are suffering from disabilities or whose circumstances does not require that they should be in prison, will no longer be imprisoned. The act makes it very clear that persons who, on account of their age, their circumstances, and their background, are not so required to be in prison will no longer be imprisoned. There is no cause for them to be imprisoned. Then, and it is worthy of note that the reason our prisons are congested is because persons who are not supposed to be in prison are in prison. But with the implementation of this act, I can assure you that petty offenders, minor offenders will no longer be found in our prisons. Then the seventh reforms that will take place if this act is well implemented is that it will increase the quality of justice. Justice has been defined as the proper application of the law to render to every person according to his or her due. The essence of the Nigerian Correctional Service Act is to ensure that those who are supposed to be in prison and those whose offense does not require imprisonment should not be in prison at all. For this reason, I want to assure you that the Nigerian Correctional Service Act is one of the greatest innovations that has occurred in the history of Nigerian administration of criminal justice system. And if the act is well implemented, I can assure you that there's going to be a new lease of life for Nigerian prisoners and for petty offenders who are not supposed to be in prison and are in prison. Presently, the act has been passed into law. The bill has been passed into act. But then what remains now is the implication. Will this act be implemented? How soon are we going to enjoy the dividends, the advantages, the implication, the reforms that this act is meant to bring? This is a question that all and sundry need to answer. Everything boils down on implementation of the act. For we in the human rights sector, we are willing to do the best we can to ensure that this act is implemented to the letter. And I can assure you that when this is done, everyone will enjoy the benefit of this legislation. Thank you all for your audience. If you have any questions concerning all I have discussed so far, feel free to send your questions. We will address all the questions, and we will also take note of every suggestion you are going to make as far as this act is concerned. Thank you so much, and I urge you to tune in next week when we'll be coming your way with another fresh topic. Thank you, and God bless.